Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And Lorenzo, on this episode, I want to talk about something that happened to me. I was in a meeting room with about 15 or 20 people, and we were going over strategy on something. And the person running the meeting, one of two people running the meeting, is a person that I've known for a while, and this person tends to interrupt everyone. And it's difficult because they don't interrupt it to say, shut up, you're wrong, or that's ridiculous, be quiet. It's not an interruption from a standpoint of you're wrong, stop talking, my point of view is better. It's almost a shared excitement in some cases, or a reaction to half the story because they're trying to engage. The point is, it doesn't seem malicious. But it was clear, and it has been clear, that when it happens to somebody in the room, myself included, it feels wrong. It feels disrespectful. It feels like I haven't been able to say what I needed to say, and I could see eye rolls coming from other people in the room when that would happen, and it got me thinking about how has this happened for so long? Because it's happened with other people that I've seen over the course of months, and either no one said anything, or they have said it and it's falling on deaf ears. And I guess the point I'm trying to say is what we need to talk about here is how to handle this, or whether or not it should be handled, and when it is handled, how. And if it's bothering you, does it need to be handled, or is this something you just kind of like chalk it up to everybody's different, you walk away, or how do you do this?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, it's a great example. I think there's a lot of things that in conversations, I kind of chalk it up to like self-awareness. There's like a lot of habits that people have, interrupting kind of being one of them. Because again, even though it might like act to move, or, it might work in a way that moves the conversation forward or faster, or there's excitement. I get that a lot. Like there's excitement in dialogue or healthy debate, and somebody interrupts quite often. And but if you're not conscious of it, and if you're not, thinking about it, and if nobody's giving you that feedback, like that's really the hardest part there, is if nobody's talked to you or pulled you aside and mentioned it, it's hard to work on if you don't see it, especially because, and what I've seen in having, family members all over the country, and relationships with parents and things like that. Like this is one of the things it's typically in somebody's personality.
Right.
Like they are this person at home and at work. It's not like they just turn it on for work and now they start interrupting everybody. But to address that type of disrespect, I think step one is having that conversation and pulling somebody inside and saying, hey, I want to talk a little bit about what just happened to the meeting, or are you conscious of this, or have you been given this feedback before? But especially in a space where you may be trying to collect ideas or thoughts or even pushback. I think it's important to first have that conversation with someone.
Yeah, I think you're right with that. I think about the times when I have withheld feedback on something like this, where I could have given feedback on this and chose not to, versus times when I could give feedback and I chose to give it. And I think what it comes down to is this. I think I try to judge or assess the intent of the person who's doing the interrupting. And if in my mind it's from the standpoint of, excitement and engagement and lack of self-awareness, then what happens is, like, if I was given feedback on something and the thing that I was doing was rooted in a lack of self-awareness, my reaction would be like, I would instantly start going through all the interactions that I've had with people over the last however many, months or whatever. And from a standpoint of, oh my God, how did I do this to other people? What did I do? Like, just from a wanting to preserve the relationship standpoint, like not a defensive, get out of my face standpoint, but just a genuine, oh my gosh, I care about these relationships. I hope I haven't hurt them, and wanting to make them better. And I think I try to put myself in the shoes of another person before I give that feedback, and think I don't want to make them feel bad for something that they didn't do out of malice. But I'm doing them a disservice in the long term if I don't, because if they're more likely to react positively and to make the changes hearing the feedback from somebody they have a really positive relationship with versus someone who just like met them for the first time. They do their whole interrupting thing after the meeting. That person goes up and says, "Hey, that was really rude. Stop it." Like that's a harsher way to hear it. And then if that person has never heard that feedback from anybody before, that could hit, like, the longer you go without getting feedback, the harder it hits. And so I think, if you like a person, if you have a relationship with somebody, you almost have a responsibility to at least, set the seeds and, set the wheels in motion of giving that feedback so that they can, take the steps if they choose to, because ultimately it's on them to make the changes. But if you consider yourself a colleague, I think there should be some personal responsibility to start that feedback process.
Yeah, and I want to be clear too. I think sometimes interrupting is a good thing, and you have to do it. And whether it's redirecting a conversation or stopping something from boiling over, or if somebody is sharing information that's not correct, like to not allow it to just live and have people hear it. Like I know that I use interruption as a tool, and I think it's definitely should be applied when needed. But I think, to your point, if it's something that is always happening, if it's something that is just a part of somebody's personality, talking to them about it, whether it's a peer relationship or reporting relationship, I think both of them, it's a very important thing to bring up and to share and to showcase if you have true intention to help somebody get better. But I think to me, the larger piece of it is kind of like, as you were talking through examples and stuff, like, and the reason why we allow it. I think sometimes we allow it because there's an element of authority potentially, or almost like admiration. Like, I think some people that a lot of people look up to, that a lot of people would be considered like a great leader or a mentor, somebody that typically always has really good insight or perspective, or that, like, we almost allow it, and to a degree sometimes expect it. From leaders that are in that space, because we really want to get to what their thoughts are anyway. So if they interrupt me, I'm good with that, because I'm trying to get them to share with me what that might look like into the future. But it doesn't necessarily take away the fact that it could be a very disrespectful thing to some. And culturally, another piece of that is some people, like, it's both sides here. There are a lot of cultures where talking, interrupting, engaging in conversation that way is very accepted and kind of expected, and if you don't do it, you never get a word in.
Yeah.
And then there are other cultures, and backgrounds of people that, as soon as you do it once, they just stop talking, because
Right.
it's like you would never disrespect an elder, or you would never create conflict at work, those types of things. So I think it is a big conversation to have, and I think that it, just the idea of disrespectful behavior, so much of that is defined by the person that's feeling disrespected. And I think it requires in leadership a really good awareness of body language and responses that you see from people in certain situations to understand how they take certain things.
Yeah, I agree with that. I like, one of the things you mentioned in there was this idea of, if I'm being interrupted, it's because I want to get what the boss is thinking anyway, so I become fine with that. And I think in some situations that's not necessarily unhealthy, because if the goal of the meeting is to get to what the boss wants anyway, then that's fine. But I think there's collateral damage when that happens, because if a boss is constantly interrupting, even if in this particular meeting that's what you want, because you want to get their thoughts so you can move forward anyway, I think it stifles future contributions from people. When the goal isn't just to get what the boss is thinking, but the goal is to collaborate and to come to agreements on what strategy should be as you're building strategy. And so I know that there are people, when I was in that meeting the other day, I know there are people who just didn't say anything because they knew they would be interrupted, and so they just didn't contribute. And was it a problem during that meeting? Maybe not. Maybe they didn't have much to contribute anyway. But I know on a long enough timeline, it is a problem. On a long enough timeline and enough meetings, there is enough potential good ideas or good contributions or relevant feedback, that doesn't get said when a person is just known for being the one who will constantly interrupt. Eventually, it will hurt. It will hurt things in terms of the relationships and in terms of potential business outcomes when people just stop speaking up because somebody's doing a lot of disrespecting.
Yeah, let me ask you, when you think about, over time, is this something that you've seen more of or less of? Because as you were talking in my head, I was thinking about my observations as far as like, is this something that's a lot more prevalent today than it was before? Like, what's your opinion on that?
That's a great question. I think probably less. I think I've seen maybe less of it over time from people as a whole. I think there is an increase in emotional intelligence from a lot of people in general. Like I think as emotional intelligence has become more valued and something that people look for in another person, I think that a lot more people have that than maybe had it 20 or 30 years ago, and one of the criteria of that, I think, is just kind of respecting others, not interrupting them, letting them finish, even if you are like chomping at the bit to like say what you want to say. Just the idea of letting somebody else finish, in general, I think so. I see a little bit less of it now. There are one-off examples where individual people, that's just who they are, But yeah, I would say less. Why do you disagree?
I think I see more interrupting, but actually like it having less intention of actually interrupting. It's like more of an attention thing where like you may be talking to someone and they're just not paying attention to what you're talking about, and then they interrupt you because it's not even like in their head that you're talking.
Yeah.
I see that more often, but it's not with the intention of like trying to interrupt a conversation.
Sure. So it's just like, kind of a result of the YouTube life where everything's on demand and everything's a distraction. It's almost like the subtle ADHD that we've all developed in our own brains over the last 10 years because of just the constant influx of stimuli. And I think there's some negative effects of that.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to this episode's 1 Minute Hack. But first, a few words from our sponsors.
All right, for this episode's 1 Minute Hack, here's what I want you to do. When it comes to giving somebody feedback or addressing a situation where someone is interrupting constantly or being disrespectful constantly, there's two things to consider. One is whether or not the disrespect was intentional. So, some people interrupt because they are actually being disrespectful, and or they're trying to be disrespectful. Some people interrupt because they are just excited and don't think they're being disrespectful. And then on the other side, there's the question you have to ask yourself is whether or not feedback is needed. And so if you think about a situation, there are situations where a person wasn't meaning to be disrespectful, but feedback is still needed. And then there are scenarios where a person is being disrespectful, but it's actually not appropriate for you to give feedback. And so you have to think about each scenario and figure out, is this something where it's my job to address this? And if so, how do I do that? Do I do it immediately when it's happening, whether there's people around or not? Do I wait and do it later on when it's just me and that person one-on-one? And all these things are things to consider. But in general, if a person needs the feedback on something they're doing, either interrupting constantly or being disrespectful constantly, if it's your responsibility to give that feedback, or if you want to see a change, it has to start with giving that feedback. And the only times that I can think of where that's not appropriate to do are when either it's a one-off interaction and you're never going to see that person again or interact with them again. So why go down that path? That's between them and the other people they have relationships with, or when it could be something that could be detrimental to your career. And then sometimes it's appropriate to take a partner when going forward with that instead of doing it on your own.
Yeah, I like the idea of understanding, and I said this earlier, that like there's a time and place for it. It's absolutely an element of normal banter and dialogue and conversation as well. I think many times, like when I feel, if I would say like I got I felt disrespected because somebody interrupted, it's probably because I felt had feelings about something else in general, and they also interrupted me, and I didn't like that either. Like that's typically
Yeah.
a lot of it. But when leaders do it consistently, I absolutely, like myself personally, I just stopped talking. Then I said, okay, well, in my mind, what they have to say is more important than what I have to say, so I'm going to allow it. I'm going to kind of go from there. But I also know that in many instances, I have to give that feedback if I felt that way, because if I felt that way, there's a chance that others might have felt that way. And somebody should be aware of it if it's something that they constantly do.
Yeah, there's an element of ownership for other people's experience, and if you're a leader of leaders, or if you're a leader of people, and you know that the person who's doing the interrupting interacts with everybody, there can be an element or a feeling of personal responsibility to address something with somebody, even if it's not negatively impacting you directly. You just kind of like grin and bear it or get through it because you don't value their opinion anyway, and you move through your day. If that can be impacting others that you feel a personal responsibility for their experience, then it could be necessary to address that on behalf of them. So that's something you definitely want to consider as well when it comes to just whether or not it's your responsibility to say something.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hack Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you all next time.